Right. Let's get everybody sitting down here. I got some questions here on my phone, so I want to make sure I get this out. Okay. So to my left, we have Bill Trovinger, who is, I want to make sure I get this right, Bill, Pharmacy and Health Customer Insights Director at Albertsons. We have Stephanie Swift, who is Senior Consumer Insights Analyst at Hormel Foods. We have Selicia Sanchez-Adame, she's a CEO and founder of ThinkGroup here in Austin. And then we have Lauren Phillips, who is Director of Research at Visit Fort Worth. So a panel mixed up with people from different industries and also on the client and the vendor side as well. So should be an interesting conversation around consumer insights when change is the only constant. And when I was thinking about what we wanted to discuss on the panel, I was thinking about like inflation, there's the Ukrainian war, there was a coup at the Capitol, and oh, by the way, there was still the pandemic that happened before that. So there's a lot of change that happens within, obviously, the markets and the world. And I want to have a conversation about how that affects customers, business, and so forth. So really, the first thing I wanted to ask here, and we're gonna go down four kind of pillars or topics here. The first one is accounting for unforeseen external change in markets and how that affects customers. So, Bill, I think I'll start with you because you give when we were prepping for this, you gave a great example, so I won't steal it, but you go ahead.
Yeah, so working in supporting our health and wellness and pharmacy business at Albertsons, so we've got about 2,200 stores nationwide. We were a very stable business, giving about, call it 1 million shots a year, flu, back to school shots, vaccines. All of a sudden, COVID hits. And we go from doing 1 million shots a year to 6 million overnight. And for those of you who got COVID shots, I mean, for most people, it was where's the closest place, where's the fastest place, where's the easiest place for me to get this done. So all of a sudden, the team realized they wanted to drive that business in a different way. Rather than being a more stable part of the business, again, we'll always be grocery first, but we have 5 million additional people coming into our store getting shots. How do we capitalize on that? And it was honestly, we had to build a marketing team. So the marketing team for pharmacy at Albertsons is realistically about 1 year old, and just brought in, again, from an insights perspective, what's changed from pre-COVID when everyone sort of had their routines, were really entrenched in how they use the pharmacy. What's changed and what stayed the same? So again, we've done a lot of the baseline work over the last, call it 8 to 9 months, and have a lot of new pieces rolling forward. But it was really, how do we get people to make that extra turn in our aisle? Like, how do we get them into the pharmacy beyond that shot? And also for the grocery shoppers, how do we get them, again, to stop the example I always give is we do interviews, I go to the Walgreens in the parking lot, drop off my prescription, do my grocery shopping at a Safeway Albertsons, and then as I'm leaving, go pick up my prescription at the Walgreens that I'm passing. Like, how do we make that one trip in an Albertsons store?
Interesting. I know, Lauren, you had mentioned something similar about, obviously, external factors affecting, customers with the pandemic, and people weren't going places, right? So how did you have to account for that at Visit Fort Worth?
Right, so at Visit Fort Worth, we have a strong partnership with the state of Texas, and so we were already receiving data on markets how markets were planning to travel for the year, and we knew that road trips were going to be huge in Texas. And so once the pandemic hit, we pretty much said, you know what, let's focus on road trip markets, those regional markets that are going to come into Fort Worth. And we knew that we didn't want to, just push, hey, visit Fort Worth, because it was a tricky time, but there were people who were going to travel anyway. So we shifted our focus to those markets who were going to travel anyway within the state, and we used the road trip data to help create experiences, maximize the experiences that they were already going to have. And we just pretty much tried to make a shift that way from, pushing out advertising to just focusing in on our social media followers, and just concentrating on those from the road trip markets, the social media, and just focusing in on those people.
Interesting. And then, Selicia, I know you had mentioned before around like cord cutters. Maybe that's kind of an interesting segue into that, maybe kind of speak to that phenomenon a little bit.
Yeah, so several years back, I'm sure all of us were like, what is a cord cutter? And companies were coming to us, like, we need to find and recruit cord cutters. And I'm like, okay, well, the incidence rate is extremely low. But then now you think about it, I mean, how many of us don't really utilize your cable anymore, right? We're all cord cutters. So now it's like understanding that point of view and making sure that we know as companies, right, that there's going to be different options. And I think I was talking about even BEVs, right? So vehicles with battery electric vehicles right now is a really hot topic that we're doing a lot of research on, because again, people, if you think about it, we did some stuff where we're like, okay, would you do a truck? Would you get a BEV truck? And they're like, no, I wouldn't do that because, of course, there's no charging stations out at the work site. So those are things that we're already kind of talking and figuring out, how do we kind of get the businesses, the cities to all invest in and to be prepared, kind of like the cord cutters, right? We had to prepare to get to that level. It's the same thing when we're thinking about where we're going in the future.
Right, that makes sense. And then, Stephanie, any examples that you can share with Hormel around external changes in markets and how that has affected customers or products that you've produced?
Yeah, I think from a CPG perspective, a lot of what we saw early on were supply chain challenges, and I think we can all relate to that as consumers going to the store and seeing empty shelves, especially early on in the pandemic. There was a lot of stock-up behavior, and so we put a lot of focus in just ensuring that we could keep products on the shelves to feed consumers. And over time, we've continued to see some of those supply chain challenges, and that's led to a lot of trade-offs for consumers and trying new brands, maybe switching to private store brands. And so really trying to think about loyalty and bringing those consumers back. I love that the word delight came up earlier. We talk a lot about delighting our consumers with food, and so ensuring that they have positive experiences to come back to our brands once we can be on the shelf again.
Do you find that consumers are more like agnostic, like they would go just for whatever's there rather than maybe not as brand loyal as they were just because of availability?
I think we see it vary quite a bit across different categories. There's a lot more tendency to switch down to different brands in some categories like peanut butter or other things where there's a standard of identity for the product. But we do see a lot of loyalty still in some of our different brands. I'm thinking more along the lines of like bacon or even our Applegate, Justin's consumers that are really more of those lifestyle brands.
Right. That makes sense. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about changes inside of an organization. Obviously, there's the customers, but that leads to changes inside an organization. And based on the demands in the markets and what's going on, Bill, I think you're the kind of ultimate example here where creating a whole segment for you and the pharmacy. So maybe speak to that a little bit if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So seeing the insights functions change over time, I will say my last 2 roles, I've been a team of 1. Prior role was at the Amazon Fresh stores building their private brand, so I'd love to revisit that conversation. But internally, you're seeing the role of insights continue to grow, I think especially as we see these changes happen, and they seem to be happening a lot quicker. Again, with the CPG background, something like Cheerios has been, again, there's always good insights, there's always new learning, market's always evolving, but like it's still a box about this big with Cheerios inside of it. But with all of these external factors, we're seeing it change so quickly, and then the skill sets needed within the insights functions also changing so quickly, going from, needing both that broad sort of business knowledge as well as that very, very specific, the more data we're getting, the more analytical we're needing to be. You need survey writers, you need someone to tell the story. And I've just found the flattening of the organizations. I thought it was really telling that when Jason was up here talking about how he's leading all of these functions, he still at the very beginning talked about how he was in home doing interviews.
Right.
And I think that's been a big change for me. I think when I started my career, there were a lot of leaders who probably hadn't been in a home in 10 years. And I'm just not seeing that in the industry anymore. It's if you're in insights and you're in the function, your expectation is you're talking to customers. Like there's no more of the ivory tower insights role. It just doesn't seem to exist.
Interesting. So more flat org structure. And
absolutely.
Interesting.
Yep. And using, again, I think there was a stat I saw on LinkedIn about how many vendors help the proliferation of market research vendors, which is great. But now being able to then sort of bring in that capability when needed versus having those pockets of people sitting within the organization, trying to cover so much.
Right. That makes sense. And you talked about in-home studies, and I know Selicia, well, you mentioned VR was a big thing with the pandemic, so you gave a good example there, so I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, so what we're seeing a lot too right now in terms of methodologies is VR, right? A lot of clients are saying, hey, we need to understand it, and we're already testing a lot in the 13 to 17-year-old range, and I think that's always fascinating because I'm like, wait, what about my age, right? They're
Right?
like, no, we're already looking to start understanding that life stage, so that way they understand how to prepare when they're marketing to that demographic when they're going to have the buying power. So we're doing a lot of VR testing, and clients are coming up with, commercials or allowing them to be inside the stores or to shop and to understand that. And it's an educational piece, right? But I do see a lot more research going in that methodology sense.
In the VR space. And then, Lauren, obviously you'd mentioned, during the pandemic, people couldn't travel or do anything, but there was still a need for museums and things for VR, but you give a good example around the use of VR in a practical sense as well.
Yes, because we knew that at some point we were going to come out of this. And so we wanted to make sure that we kept meeting planners top of mind and make sure that we, showcase the destination to people near and far, even if they weren't planning to come to Fort Worth. We wanted to make sure they had access to the city. So we did work on videos that showcase the city, showcase our venues. So VR is major for the meeting planning industry. And I also think about QR codes. We used to laugh at QR codes, and now everybody wants to use QR codes because no one wanted to touch pamphlets and brochures at the time. So we innovated in that way by putting a QR code in windows downtown so that people could have access to the city even if we weren't speaking with them directly.
Interesting how the QR code comes back,
Yeah, and now you have that awesome game that we can quickly
I know, see,
access.
it wouldn't be possible without the QR code. So,
Yes.
interesting. And Stephanie, I wanted to ask you about around sort of experiences and for consumers through research, like how can we shape experiences through research? I know Jason gave some great examples with Traeger. I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit around maybe how research helps shape experiences for consumers.
Yeah, I think one thing our team talks a lot about is empathy. And so we try to be the boots on the ground, doing ethnographies and really ensuring that we understand where consumers are coming from. And then I think a lot of times shaping experiences by, iterating on different prototypes with your consumers. So whether that's in person, CAP sessions or focus groups, or doing one-on-one in-home, but really exposing them to early stage ideas and then building those out with consumers and really feeling like they're part of, putting this product together and then one day seeing it on the shelf.
Interesting. It's going back to in-person, right? That's the big thing, face-to-face, and having the way to collect the data there.
And I don't know how you
yeah.
all feel, but it feels like that's our role now, is to push that, because it feels like everything has become, I want an NPS, I want a CSAT score, I want to measure different points in the journey, and my role has become advocating for, let's get back in home, let's go walk the stores. Things that I think as a researcher, it doesn't feel like that should be a challenge, but it is. There's a huge piece of our job that's now just advocating for going and actually talking to our customers.
And even now, our leadership team, like coming to a conference like this and then going and doing store walks, I know it sounds silly, but just immersing yourself in different communities and observing behavior as it's happening right in front of you.
Interesting.
And I was going to say, to piggyback off that too, having a facility here in Austin, we've seen an increase, right, in in-person research, but not necessarily to come to our facility, but also to go back to the stores and do the shop-alongs, to go back and do the in-homes, right? And believe it or not, those customers, your customers, they want that interaction again. Because during the pandemic, even for them, we talk about burnout, right? With just us as, with our team and our company. These participants were burnout, right? They're still doing online stuff, right? With different companies, but they're just like, okay, I have so many distractions going on. My kids banging on the door, even though we tell them, be in a quiet spot, the dog's barking, you know, they're on a recliner, even though we say, please don't rock your chair. So the point is they're burnout too, and they're just as anxious to get back and just have some interaction with companies.
Right. It's interesting that it comes down to like the human experiences at the end of the day. So interesting. I want to talk a little about, we talked about VR and some things, but around sort of changing technologies and adapting to those trends. Lauren, do you have any examples of that where you've had to, either because of the markets or new technology comes out, that you have to adapt and take on this technology?
Oh, yes. So we have access to foot traffic data, and we actually have access to 2 different products. And, you know, I have to make sure my team understands, hey, we're using this in different ways. One, we're understanding, you know, we're having an understanding of the markets coming into the city. And on the other hand, with the second product that we ended up using, we're able to see venue trends. And so what's happening at the arena, what's happening within downtown hotels. And one of the things that I found interesting by looking at that foot traffic data, this actually happened last January when we had that huge ice storm that came through Texas, and you know, all of it was, you know, we all know it was a mess, but it was a dark time, you know. And again, working in hospitality, we want to make sure people feel that delight, and we wanted to work with our community. And so one area of our city, it's called Evans Plaza, and so you have like a walk of fame of all of the business people, educators, media professionals, and they were all Black leaders in Fort Worth, and there was no foot traffic happening there. So I used that data to help steer a conversation with my team on like, hey, what could we do with this? Can we host a breakfast in the plaza? Can we host something fun? I mean, I know that's small compared to what's happening, but let's let the community know that this is here and that they can come and we can, you know, just try to steer the conversation into some more delightful ones. And we ended up using that area to promote the Juneteenth walk with Miss Opal. So that research really led into an event that we're starting to celebrate every year.
Interesting. Just by foot traffic data.
Yes, foot traffic data. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Selicia, how about any changing? You're obviously on the vendor side here, but you see a lot of different technology and changes. So I know you mentioned VR. Any other examples?
Well, I kind of wanted to elaborate a little bit more in the VR term because of the fact that a lot of companies now are struggling to find people that want to come and work for them, right? And so what these companies are doing is utilizing, again, VR and showing them, especially targeting the younger demographics when they're in high school, when they're in middle school, so that way they understand and they could get a flavor of what it would be like to work in X company, industry, or another industry. And I think that's powerful for, one, the younger generations to have options, right? And I think that's the thing that we always need to think about, is giving options to the consumers, thinking if you're coming from the client side. So,
all about the options, right? People want choices. Yeah. What about Stephanie, for you, any changing technology or trends that you've seen or utilized at Hormel?
Yeah, I think just, I guess, not necessarily technology that we're leveraging, but thinking about it from our team's perspective and the time and the talent that we have. You mentioned earlier, like, you need people to program these surveys. And I think, you know, a lot of the modern strategies are moving to this digital footprint, and that can impact your teams quite a bit if you don't have, like I said, kind of the time or the talent to do it all on your own. So I think the do-it-yourself research is amazing that we've moved so quickly into that digital space, but it's also very challenging as well. If you have a lean team, you've got a lot of projects to do, you have to present the results. And so finding vendors and suppliers to work with that have a client service team, we've been really lucky to have a lot of vendors like that. So I think balancing, exploring new technology and how it impacts research, but then also relying on some of your traditional methodologies and vendors.
Right. No, I was going to say I know a company that could probably help you out with that. You know, that is, I guess, too. So, Bill, what about you?
Yeah, I
What
think
changed?
previous role was at the Amazon Fresh grocery stores, so the new physical stores, and the technology filling those stores is ultimately just in context data collection on grocery that other grocers don't have. So the carts that scan as you're putting things in, they're also scanning when you take things out. They're mapping your path around the store. They know where you stop, how long you stop. If you ever are in one of those stores, look at the ceiling. It is more cameras than a Vegas casino, just wall-to-wall cameras. And it's ultimately tracking every motion you make in that store. I will say, having seen the back end, like the army of people that would be needed to parse and use that data doesn't exist. So it's all just coming in at this point, but just know it is. And they've also, when you enter the store, your Prime account is tied to your palm print. So you walk in, you scan your hand, and you then don't pay, and it's just tracking you as you move. When you're talking about customer loyalty and retaining value, like things like that, where they are I'm trying to say this as positively as I can. Amazon knows a lot about you. They use that data effectively to market to you. But just know it's, I think that's going to just continue to ramp up in the future. I think companies are going to continue to invest in ways that they are collecting data without you knowing it.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned just the sheer amount of data, but you need a team to even, to even start to make sense of it. Do you see that changing, like where people will, either new technologies or teams will come into play? And I mean, it's data sitting there, right? It's like kind of.
Yes.
Okay.
But yeah, and I know had a lot of vendors approach me with AI solutions that can, look through the data, just really quick ways to analyze and get top level insights out of it. Again, I wish I could say I was better versed and have used more of them. But I think that's the next iteration. Is we're in the collection phase, and we've been in that phase for a while. I think the action phase is coming very, very shortly.
Interesting. What about you, Lauren, in that regard? I'm sure there's a ton of data from foot traffic and everything else that you collect. How are you able to make sense of it all, and what tools do you use?
Well, gratefully, we have a dashboard that has all of our information from the organization for the city. So whether it's Google Analytics data, the foot traffic data, visitor spend, hotel tax collections, everything, all things data. Even I'm thinking about meeting planners, and when we're booking business, we try to look out for future dates and see, okay, we're expecting a large number on this day or that. But I'd say that the dashboard that we're currently using was a game changer. We started our conversations for it in October 2019, and it was all implemented by the week before the pandemic started, and so it came in just in time, So I'd say that the dashboard has been a game changer for us.
Gotcha. Any examples with you, Stephanie, around just making sense of all the data that you're collecting out there?
Yeah, and one thing that popped into mind as he was talking about Amazon was just how short the shopper journey now can be from awareness to conversion for consumers, and really trying to understand that behavior. You could become aware of a product online, and it could be in your cart or to your doorstep the next day. And so truly trying to uncover some of those insights and interrupt that behavior, or that has just been really exciting, but also very challenging.
Kind of daunting a little bit too,
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
Interesting. Selicia, how about you? I mean, there's a ton of data you're collecting and things. Is there any examples that you like to share with your clients around best ways to make sense of it?
I mean, kind of echoed everything what you all stated, but I mean, there's so much data from all the different types of research. So you got to think, you all are from direct, right? You're direct to your customers, where I am in all different types of customers in terms of for clients. So we have a tremendous amount of data, and it's utilizing that and understanding, so that way whenever we work with other clients, it could be like, hey, I suggest X or I suggest Y, just because we know what works and what doesn't. So at the end, it's just understanding the different industries from the data that we're receiving.
Interesting, interesting. So I'm going to put you guys on the spot here a little bit. I think I want to play a game. It's called Quant or Qual. So we'll go down and say your favorite quant method first, and then we'll say favorite qual method after that. So, Bill, what's your favorite quantitative method?
Oh, favorite quantitative method. This is a tough one. You did put me on the spot. I'm going to go with the conjoint. Just having been in the tech world, like getting features selected and having a huge ability to do that across different offerings from, say, with Microsoft, what should our Office offering look like for this size of customer? What should our Azure deal look like? So kind of putting those bundles together for technology packages with a conjoint was one of my favorites.
Interesting. So conjoint. How about you, Stephanie?
I'm just going to go really big and say a segmentation. I know that sounds daunting, but I feel like as you can understand different segments of consumers and the way that we can get so granular in understanding and targeting those consumers is changing all the time and really powerful.
I'm going to copy and say segmentation as well, because right now we're seeing a lot of that in the research, especially like the personas and understanding. And I think each company has their own persona and their own segmentation. So for me, it's been really fascinating to see that kind of surface up lately.
All right, so I'll be a triplet and say I also love segmentation. I get really crazy with the data that we get in. There's so much because, the Denver traveler is going to be different from the LA traveler. And we want to make sure that all of that data is crafted and personalized for, website experiences and even down to your in-person experience in Fort Worth. So I love segmentation data.
Segmentation data. Mm-hmm. All right. Bill, what about, I gave you some time, qualitative.
Qualitative, my favorite qualitative is in-home, by far. Example, so I was on Old Spice during the whole brand reinvention of Old Spice, so I'm on a horse ad, all that stuff. And overnight, we went from our core customer being, 55 plus, aging out of the categories, to being cool with 14-year-olds, within a matter of a few weeks. So we had to scrap everything we had, and it was truly like myself and our marketer, sitting in a 14-year-old's basement with his buddies, playing Call of Duty, ordering pizzas, and just like, hey, what do you guys do on the weekends? How do you get ready? What's your going out routine? And we went in with the theory of like, they're gonna be very shy about this. We need to do some educational kind of stuff. They were the most confident. Like, I wish I had their confidence today. We did the first day of research. We didn't take any of our female coworkers because we're like, if I was a 14-year-old boy, which I was at one point, I wouldn't want to be telling this like professionally put together 30-year-old woman about how I use deodorant and body wash and things. And these dudes, not a care in the world. And again, just being able to sit with them and play video games and eat pizza and really get to understand their lifestyle is just amazing.
Was it the pizza or the video games, though? No.
Again, both were good.
Both are good, yeah. Stephanie, how about you? Favorite qualitative?
I have to say in-person too, ethnography. We're fortunate, we have a cultural anthropologist on staff, so we have the opportunity to get in-home as often as one person can. But yeah, extremely powerful to understand the why and really see what consumers have. You could talk to someone and they talk about all the healthy things that they like to do and eat, and then you open the pantry and you see otherwise. So really, getting to the root of the consumer behavior.
Yeah, and for me, definitely anything in person. Of course, whenever you have an in-person focus group, right, people start, you say one idea, then it ignites somebody else to be like, oh yeah, let me piggyback off that. But also too, I feel that in-homes are extremely valuable because you think you know what your customers have or use in their pantry or how they, serve breakfast or how they do, dinner. So that's really important. And then the other piece that I think is really beneficial too is doing friendship groups, right? Because when you invite friends over, they're in their more element to share and to bounce off ideas, and understanding how they use your products is mind-blowing whenever you have all your friends hanging around.
Yeah. So I'd say in person is also huge for me. Within our community, there's a huge focus on, the Stockyards, Sundance Square downtown, but you do have community members that may feel left out of the story, and so it's important for me to get out there and make sure that I'm in communication with our Hispanic chamber, our Black chambers, and I want to make sure that they know that they are included in the story, and also understand from them. So what do you think are some of the places that visitors should come when they come visit? And so we get so much feedback from partners at the chambers within our city, and it really adds to the story that we're telling the world.
Interesting. So in home, I think, kind of took the cake. Okay. Wanted to talk a little bit about crossovers from industries. Do all of you look at other industries and say, hey, you're doing something cool here, I should try that in my own industry? Any examples come to mind there?
I think for us in thinking about food, we do talk a lot about like health and beauty and how the speed in that area changes so rapidly. So if you think about like a makeup set or something like that, there's always new products. And so I think that's something that we always strive for a little bit, is to understand how they're uncovering those insights, where those products are coming from, and then how quickly they're adapting to some of those changes.
Right, makes sense.
And sticking with the food, my time at General Mills, we would always be looking at QSRs, like regional restaurant trends. It would start out of home, and then it would always end up like, do we need to make this product or bring this product to life in a way that customers can then bring it into home? So we used a lot of out-of-home food examples to then inspire what we were doing for in-home consumption.
Interesting. Lauren, any ideas come to mind?
I would, food does come top of mind too, because food makes the experiences, much better and stronger within our destination. So I'd say that is actually one of our top focus this year, just expounding on food experiences, food tours within Fort Worth. And so we are looking more into that and trying to understand what areas are some of our visitors going to most, where other areas can we steer them into so that they understand that these experiences exist. And so, it's even down to, when we talk about craft barbecue, the tacos, everything, there's so many different flavors. And so we're just trying to hone in better on that messaging. So food is major for us.
And I think in the health and wellness space, it's a similar idea of we're still looking in the health and wellness space, but what are those new things that are happening? And does that something that makes sense with what we can offer? Again, I think Albertsons offering a Peloton bike or connected fitness probably doesn't make sense with the brand. But is there something we could do with connected health, connected prescriptions? Some of the, I think I was talking to somebody last night about like hims and hers. So, drug delivery we're calling them lifestyle. So, we already have the medicines, we have the delivery methods. Is that something we could look into? So it's looking at what's happening and what's kind of new and exciting in the sphere. And then does that make sense with our brand, or does that make sense with our current offerings?
Right, makes sense. And then, it's dead. Yeah, it's dead.
No.
It's okay.
Diminish.
Sure, I'll pass it back. There, that's better. Now you can hear me. So I wanted to switch gears a little bit, and change obviously is good, but there's a lot of things that just won't change, but you want them to. What are those things that come to mind in research or your industry or the job that you can speak to? And maybe we'll start with you, Lauren, on the end, and then work our way down.
Yeah, one thing I've realized is, everyone's not going to understand what you're doing every day. A lot of us are in silos, but it's important. I know me personally, instead of just sending the information out, I try to see if my team can get together in a quick meeting. Can we catch up for 25 minutes and talk about this data that just came out? Because everybody has access to data, but it's how we use it. And so if we're working on 3 or 4 projects at one time, I want to make sure that we're getting the best bang out of our buck, and also communicating that data, communicating some action plans. So I can't expect everyone to know what I'm doing every day. So it's important for me to voice it and talk about it with the team so that we can move forward with effective change.
Interesting. Selicia?
And I think for us, the change is just understanding. I say I have 2 clients, right? I have my clients, and then I have my participants, my panel, who I feel are my clients as well. So it's understanding what it is that even our participants expect out of us, to understanding what our clients expect, and how can we change together to match them and to understand them and to educate, right? Because people still right now in our community, they don't know that this industry exists. They still think, and you'll be mind blown every time I'm like, yeah, we have this opportunity, there's consumer insights divisions, we pay you to come and share your thoughts and opinions, and they're like, that's too good to be true. And I'm like, no, it really is going on, and what better way for you to be a part of it? So it's change and understanding, I think, go hand in hand, but both for client perspective and our participant side.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of education even for the participants, right? And people that you're trying to get in. It's like, no, it's not a scam. We're not a telemarketer. It's different, right? And there's a lot that you can do there, I'm sure. Stephanie, what about you? Something that you just want to see change, but just won't?
Yeah, I don't know if it won't, but I worry sometimes that it's not changing fast enough, and that is kind of the panel of consumers or respondents that you get access to. So I think a lot of times we are trying to find, certain ethnographies, or not ethnographies, ethnicities or a different race, and I think sometimes that's challenging to get a representative sample across different areas, and so that's something that I wish would change faster.
Got it. So the speed of which things change, not necessarily. Makes sense. And then, how about you, Bill?
Yeah, I agree a lot with what Lauren said on self-service models, and again, I think that's everyone's dream, is to say, hey, I built this dashboard, go read it, it's great, or here's this report, but I think it's still our role, and I think it might be forever, to make sure those insights get to the right people at the right time. I just think that it's our role to, again, be telling that story, really be pushing those insights out. But I do think there is a place for dashboards that, you don't need to email me to get this number, it's here. And part of that's working internally and, setting that precedent, but I just don't think it's going to change that our role will always be of one that is going to be sort of pushing those insights out as much as, people want them. And you hear it internally, I want more insights, I want to know more about our customer. But I would say you meet halfway, but you're meeting, 90-10 on getting them that insight.
Right. It's interesting. It's in the dashboard, but they still want to hear it from the person. It's kind of similar to the in-home, right? You can probably get that data otherwise, but you want to be there in person and get it. So that's interesting. Now, around sort of obviously we're talking about where change is the only constant. What are some of the ways that when you talked with customers, they don't want to change, but you're like, no, you need to change? And Bill, I'll go back to you. I know you had mentioned, obviously in the pharmacy industry, there's some things there.
Pharmacy, we're doing a lot of that foundational research and just seeing the very, very distinct split between your younger customers who, again, are used to the Amazonification of the world of, I want this, I just want to go online, I want to order it, I don't want to have to interact with folks, to your older customers who desperately seek that pharmacist conversation. They want to know all the risks, what, should they eat, should they not eat? I can go through our NPS scores in store, and all of the 9s and 10s are, I like Jane the pharmacist. I like Steve the pharmacist. Like, that's the only comment we're getting. So it's kind of bridging that gap in a way that we're then doing research that meets both groups' needs as well. Because again, if we're trying to do this white space innovation project, it's hard with customers who are like, you can offer me the world, I'm going to go talk to my pharmacist and pick up my diabetes medicine every month. Like, that's it. Right. Versus someone who is also like, I don't want to go in store for anything, and I think we kind of need to blend the two. So, very distinct groups there.
Interesting. Stephanie, any ideas that come to mind around, you know that this needs to change, but the customers just aren't willing to? Like, the data may be showing you something and just they're not willing?
Yeah, I think for us, it's putting together a retailer story. And so we're translating the consumer insights to then the shopper insights. So if I go back to my segmentation and my love for it, ensuring that you're getting a quota of different respondents that are shopping particular retailers. So then you can cut your data by the retailer and go back to the retailer with a specific story around your shoppers, and this is their behavior and this is what they're looking for. It's pretty hard to argue against some of the data that you can provide in a story form like that.
Right. And then how do you do that with a story? Is it working pretty well, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's been kind of a transition. I think sometimes the consumer is the shopper, but sometimes the shopper is not the consumer. And so delineating those two pieces of insights and then putting together the story. And then a lot of it is also training your sales team and to have them be, insights-driven sellers, I guess,
Yeah.
insights-driven sales.
Right.
So yeah, I think a lot of it's just, it takes some muscle memory and a lot of collaboration across our teams, but it's been working very well.
Yeah, you brought up an interesting point when you said that the shopper isn't necessarily the consumer of it, right? I mean, someone goes to the store, they buy something, but they're not the ones that are using it. So it's almost not convincing the consumer, it's convincing the shopper, which is probably a bigger challenge. Bill, you're nodding your head like, yes.
Yeah, again, going back to a food example, you see
Yeah.
that a lot with cereals, fruit snacks, even in the personal care category with Old Spice, like that worked because moms hated those Axe commercials that were horribly offensive if you go back and watch them. And basically we painted them into a corner and said, great, they're gonna own this kind of offensive male vision. Like if we can box them in there and be okay to mom, we don't have to be great, but better than that, mom will buy it for her teen kid. So absolutely, it's a great example.
Interesting. And then, Selicia, around in your industry, and what would you say to that word?
So I think the fun part, right, is talking to clients, and we always like to do what we call a kickoff call with all the different researchers that we're working with, but understanding what is a purpose, right? What's the why on why you're doing this? So that way us as a team could then make sure we fine tune that when we're talking to these individuals in our panel, right? But also whenever we're kicking off a project, in the first 1 to 2 days, we're gonna know if there's gonna be a roadblock, right? And it's our responsibility, I think, at that point to go back and talk to the client saying, hey, I know you have all these quotas, because sometimes we could all write up a great screener, we think we know who our clients are, we put it out there, we're like, why aren't we finding X? And it's like, well, we found them, but now we're like funneling in, and it's coming really hard for us to find that needle in a haystack. So in terms of change, it's just educating both parties, right? And understanding like, hey, could we be a little bit of flexibility here because of the fact that we're not finding them? I mean, they're legit who you want to speak with because we know the background on why you're conducting the research. But I think there might need to be some flexibility to get that target audience.
Interesting. And then, Lauren, in terms of, the tourism world, what are some things that the data is showing that it would be good for consumers to maybe change their behaviors, but they're just not willing to?
Well, it's interesting. So Bill mentioned bridging that gap. And so it's not only important for me to understand what visitors want, but also what residents want and what they see, because these are our partners. And so I'll never forget the first meeting that I went into for my team was, it was a huge party for all of the data results that came back on perceptions for Fort Worth. And I'm like, whoa, a party for the data, this is great, I'm here. But there has been this constant talk about cowboys and culture. And for the last 4 years, it's, okay, how do we just bridge that gap? Because can we just have both? Can we celebrate the West and also bring in all of the wonderful cultural aspects of our city? So instead of just promoting, cowboys only or culture only, we're working to bridge that gap even more and tell the story of the modern West and highlight the museums, highlight all of these beautiful celebrations that happen within the city across different cultures. So I know cowboys and culture is going to be an ongoing thing, but when you talked about bridging the gap, you made me think about that, and all of the data that I get back is always half and half, just like the perceptions I get back from residents and visitors. I think they want it all, and I think we just want to work on giving it all to them in some kind of capacity.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're really serving two needs, right? With the residents and then the tourism folks as well, the visitors. So
Exactly.
It's probably an interesting balance, I'm sure.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
The cowboys and culture, I like it. Kind of wanted to spend a little bit of time around, I think we have a few minutes left here, but what is we kind of talked about in general of something that we're moving ahead or that you want to change, but what are some things specific to the research and different tools or methodologies that you want to see left behind? You don't understand like why it's still here. Anything come to mind, Bill?
If someone else wants to jump in or they have one top of mind, I got to think about that.
I'll jump in on and again, don't mean to offend anybody in the room here, but when we get screeners, right, we all develop screeners. It's maybe looking at taking some of those demographic questions. I mean, I get ethnicity is very important. Maybe some college education, is it really important, is it not? But some of those like standardized demographic questions, I look at it as like, do we really need it? Are you really honing in more on like the habits, right? What is it again that you're trying to find? So that's kind of something I think about. I know it's not going to happen overnight because, but that's just my thought.
Yeah, that's been going on for a long time like that, right? Anything come to mind for you, Lauren?
It's hard to think about. Can we go step?
Yeah, I was actually, I've been thinking about it since you gave me the opportunity. It's just the length of time projects take, both from an internal perspective, the swirl, the external with the vendor, the bouncing back and forth. And I don't have an answer. I just wish I knew a way that, again, I understand there's the building blocks of a project that it needs to take 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks. But like, where can we start to look to cut out some of that time? Where it's the insights are we're getting to the insights faster on a project basis. Again, there's some internal stuff we can do, but I think it's just one of those having to respond saying, I'm gonna go, like, tell me what questions you have. I'm gonna go type up a doc. You're gonna respond to the doc. We're gonna bounce that around for a week, and then we're gonna go, like, how do we shorten that process and have the team, I think it's a lot of it having the team more integrated into the process and just being able to work with them and saying either they trust you to go do this or, yes, I want your feedback. I want this to be perfect. I want to answer your questions, but I also don't want to get feedback for the next 4 weeks. So that's my thing, is if we can eliminate the swirl pre-project, I would be a very happy person.
Makes sense.
That's
Anything
okay.
come to mind, Stephanie?
I was just thinking about the scope creep sometimes
Oh,
that
okay.
happens, and yeah, maybe if we just take Jason's advice and focus a little bit more on each project, that might speed things up.
Got it. So focus. All right, I think with that, we can wrap up the panel. I'd like to thank Bill, Stephanie, Selicia, and Lauren today. If you have questions, I know they'll be around. I'm sure more than happy to answer them. So thank you very much. And then I think up next we have, great job. Yeah.
Thank you.